everybody. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, and when I'm not recording this podcast or writing all about training, nutrition, and endurance sports, I'm probably at the moment either getting ready for my first race of the season or panicking about the fact that my first fiction book, Shred Girls Lindsay's Joyride, is coming out in just a week.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I'm an endurance coach and a registered kinesiologist. And this is the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we talk to people who move in a variety of ways or do different sports or just excel in a single movement or sport and sort of can teach us all a little bit about that. So that's where you are. Thank you for arriving in this place again or for the first time. And yeah, we're very happy to be here this week. We're talking on a one topic, but what else is going on beyond our one topic for today?
Oh, well, I did my last long run ahead of my upcoming race. I feel like if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've kind of heard the last few months, like between, minor knee injury and travel and all this stuff, I feel like I've kind of accidentally built up this race to be a much bigger deal, both in my head and probably in talking to people than it actually is. This is on my calendar as like a C race. So I keep reminding myself to kind of relax and, I don't know, enjoy this next week and chill out heading into it. So that's where I am right now, is kind of this weird state of worrying about a race, but then also not worrying about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough, there's always that anticipation, right?
And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, the first race of the season, the pre-race jitters, you're knocking the cobwebs off, so to speak, on your start line technique, and you're not really sure what's going to happen because it's been, almost a year since the last time you were.
Well, I'm not sure the start line technique in a 50K is quite as important.
Okay, so that was exactly what I thought last August at the Killington mountain run that I did. And if I hadn't just gone at the start to follow the group of three women that kind of collected towards the front, I would have lost them in the first 5K, and I probably never would have caught up with the woman I eventually passed.
Yeah, I guess fair enough. But I mean, it's not 100 meters if you're, or your start position is so important that you'll never get around to get in with them in the first kilometer even, right? You have time and room when you're on foot, and it's not like Boston Marathon, you're coming from 10,000th row.
No. But I'm still gonna say yes and no, because if you go out at
we got a race.
Yeah, and if you go out at kind of the right hard enough speed, you don't have to end up sprinting around people. And I mean, it's not trail running turns out to be pretty similar to mountain biking, right? The areas in which you can pass are just not that plentiful. And especially, unfortunately, when you're female at these races, I think there's a bit of a bro type mentality amongst some of the men who are going out really hard that are probably going to blow by 4K, but get really
I like to encourage
hot under the collar.
The ladies that I work with, we work on being firm and yelling.
Well, clearly.
Because it's definitely if you're going to be at the front, right? You just have to go for it, right? And
But that also involves the confidence to know that you can get around the guy. There's definitely a lot of times where you get up behind them and you're
the two things probably go together, I guess, right? But so yeah, I think we'll tie in maybe to your race for today. But is there there's no other updates? Just really your book's coming out. We have Shred Girls, shred-girls.com. You can look on this on Amazon. This is coming out on the 7th, which I keep saying the 9th, but it's the 7th.
I feel like now you've just gotten the 9th in everyone's head. It is the 7th.
It's the 7th, and so it's on Amazon for pre-order, so you can just forget that date and just do it now if you're into that. We're doing a launch party on the day before Mother's Day, which is the Saturday, May 11th, and that's in Markham, Ontario, just near Toronto. And that's a great event. You can find out details about that on shred-girls.com. And it's just a great book, middle grade fiction. Check it out.
Yeah, I'm super excited. And I mean, I've said it before. I'll say it this, last time, I guess, because next time we do an episode, the book will actually be out and available to just, one click and boom, it's at your door.
Much more convenient.
Yeah.
Although the pre-sale, I've done a few of those and they're pretty good.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is, like, the pre-orders are a huge help with the publishing company. It just kind of shows, okay, this book actually is going to reach a bunch of people. So, the more pre-orders, the bigger the flood of books that go out on the day is. So any and all pre-orders, super appreciated. Email me for stickers if you do pre-order, etc. Yeah. So any updates on your end?
Not really. Yeah, we're doing plans. Plans have been really good this year. Actually, it's been really good interactions with people. A lot of people are getting.
When you say plans,
so I have like coaching, which is like I'm interacting back and forth, and that's quite busy as well. But I always sort of just push plans more so, just because I can and sort of interact with people in like one day type thing where it's okay. We maybe talk on the phone, and then I build out a plan for 3 months. Usually I do them in 3-month blocks. There's some variety there, but that's how that works. And so it gives people sort of a routine that's reminding, all the things we talk about here, the recovery days, some longer days, some harder days, weeks that are easier and so forth. So it's trying to avoid that, but then it also gives new workouts, right? A lot of times it's like, oh, I've never done this type of workout before, which sort of adds some variety, right? And some new interest, new purpose. So yeah, so I've been doing a bunch of those, and it's sort of now that we're into spring, right? You're sort of seeing people are like, oh, now I'm outside. What do I do? Type thing, right? Maybe it's not as easy to follow, some Zwift program or something. So seeing a bit of that. And then skill stuff, we just did a clinic on the weekend too with a club as well. So that's starting to kick off, and a couple dates left. I'm not even teasing them with this, but there's a couple weekends, maybe one weekend free with the summer, and maybe one or two in the fall. So if anyone has clubs or groups, would love to do a little clinic with your group. So let's get into this.
Yeah, well, I was going to say on the topic of kind of that, what do I do today for the daily workout now that we're outside and not on Zwift? Today's guest, Dr. Simon Marshall, he's the author of The Brave Athlete. He's a coach. He's a sports psychologist. He's one of like the smartest people I know. We've had him on, I think, twice already.
Yeah.
And he's just got so many great things to say about pretty much any topic. And today's topic is really about what to do when you're in a workout and you are just not feeling it. So his section of that is kind of all about ways to sort of motivate yourself and get moving and get excited about your whatever's happening. So we talk about, things like why a certain playlist or having a certain music on is going to help, or why thinking about your teammates or your family or any kind of external motivator is going to help. A few different kind of options, and it kind of came through as I was doing an article on this, talking to the Rally UHC cycling team about what motivates them to get through workouts. But then I wanted to kind of get an expert take on why their motivators work. So we sort of go through the few motivators that the team uses and kind of explain why they work and how to kind of tweak them to make them even more effective. So it's a really interesting kind of way of looking at it from a psychological standpoint. But before we got into that, we kind of wanted to also talk about the physical side of it, which is, sometimes when you're not feeling motivated, that can actually be an indicator that you need a break from training. Especially if you're not working with a coach and you don't really have someone who's looking at your schedule and your numbers, and you're just kind of following along with either, a training plan you found in the back of a book or online, or you're just kind of going out every day and sprinkling in whatever you think of for, an interval workout or anything like that. So it's kind of easy to start getting into dangerous territory, we'll say. So, Peter, what are your physical indicators that a workout should continue or shouldn't continue?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? I think you touched on some good ones for sure. I think you can we look at what is the routine like, right? So it's almost like you end up talking more about before you're not motivated. And so I was just talking about training plans and sort of having a recovery day or two, a recovery week, having some undulation in the volume and intensity. So a long day maybe on your Sundays, hard day maybe on your Tuesday or Wednesday. And so you have this variety, right? So it's a lot. I always find when you get that routine going, it's way easier. After your off day, you just want to go and rip the world apart, right? When
in like a good way.
And then when it's Sunday, you've already maybe gone hard on a Saturday or something, and it's like you've already done that. You've gone so hard the day before. You just want to go on a nice long ride, maybe get a friend and just chat So I think that variety is a big way to head that off, because then it's just, you're shifting the focus, you're shifting the energy systems, you're shifting, how hard you have to work and how you have to prepare and which playlist you're listening to, right? You maybe save the really hardcore stuff for the intensity days, and maybe you're listening to a soothing podcast voice on the other days, right? And so I think that pre-time is a really good way to head it off. And if you're having trouble, maybe take a recovery day and look at your schedule and sort of just reassess things.
Yeah, I think the big thing I think of when it comes to should I quit my workout tends to be get dressed and get out the door and just go for 5 minutes before you decide you're going to quit your workout, because I think a lot of us are very inclined to, when the day is busy and we're just kind of stressed and just not feeling it, to automatically be like, oh, I can't possibly do my workout today, and skip the workout, when a lot of the time the workout's probably going to actually make us feel a lot better. So I think before you decide to throw in the towel, just get out the door and do 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And see where you're at after that 5 minutes. Because I think probably 90% of people will keep going after 5. Or, if it sucks, you turn around and you come home.
Yeah, and you're talking, like you said, quitting the workout, but you're actually talking more about starting the workout. So this is like the difference between a DNF and a DNS. So did not start, right? And I think that's a good rule of thumb. If every other day this week's gone well, and today, especially for the busy people that, again, that I work with coaching mostly, there's the amount of stuff on these people's plates is a lot. Like, they're up early, they're maybe training early, which is a good tactic in itself, but they're up, the kids are going to school, the kids have breakfast, the lunches, then they have to get to an executive meeting or something, and then they're like out, they have to do something else at lunch for the kids, and then they're doing this, and then they're running to kids activities, and then there's just so much going on, and then somehow they're fitting in some exercise time, some time for themselves for a half hour, an hour. So mentally you're going to be, I'm tired even just thinking about all that. So you have to acknowledge that, like, just your brain is going to be like, I just want to sit on the couch and go to sleep. And that may be okay. But a lot of times once you're out, your body's actually like, yeah, this is great. And like your brain's like, oh, this actually is pretty good, feeling good, and like being out in nature. So your strategy of starting, just start. There's no option. The clothes are laid out, just start. And once you're out, then you have a couple options, right? And this is where I think we get into that, do you quit or do you continue? And I think there's a way to win most of those days. Like, I think a lot of times you'll feel okay and you can at least go through the motions for that day. So that might be, maybe it's not your best workout, but it's a workout. You get the intervals done, but they're not maybe the best you've ever done.
Right. You don't get your best without having
well, and I think that's
numbers.
a good message. And sometimes, especially with wattage now and some of these concepts, like or pace and running, if you're not at the best pace of your all life, it's sometimes folks, they overthink that. There's a range, and you just need to keep putting hay in the barn. Sometimes it's half a hay bale. Sometimes it's a full hay bale. Sometimes one of those big round bales. It's the best day ever. And so I think that message is good, right? Because sometimes it's just a little bit of something in there is going to be a good thing, right? And then the next day, again, might be a longer day. It doesn't matter. And then you get a recovery day, and then you get back to come back, and hopefully you feel a bit better. It's a Saturday, right? So you maybe have a little more ability to ease in. So I think those are important facts. And then I think some days you also have the option of maybe today just isn't an intensity day. Like, it was planned. I got out the door. It's sunny. So just switch off the gangster rap playlist, go to the like soothing podcast, voice podcast, and just spin for an hour. That's half a bale of hay in the barn, right? And that's a win, right? We've got some hours in, we've got whatever thing you're counting and compiling in your barn of hay, right? It counts, right? And then reassess when you get back.
Sort of like with the SATs where you got points for just writing your name.
Well, it is. It's very much like that, right? It's, in the math test where you show your work and you've done this and you've done this, and you get 4 out of 5 and the answer's not even right, right? So I think in the day, the micro sort of like way we might look at this, I think that's a good way to do it. Now, on day 2, if you're still feeling crummy and the numbers aren't good and things like this, or the numbers are lower or maybe worse, that knee pain's gotten worse would be another sort of obvious example, or you just like can't get out of bed, then that's, I think, where you want to assess. Maybe it's time for a rest week, right? A rest day. But I think as a rule of thumb, you don't want to add a rest day for the sake of one day, you want to get out the door. And I think that's the ultimate message.
Yeah. I think the other way I kind of tend to trick myself, and I've written about this a few times, is I have two options. I can finish my workout, or I can come home and do something that's equally annoying to me, which usually for me is like, I'm gonna come home and I'm gonna meditate for half an hour. Like, I'm not gonna put on Riverdale on Netflix and veg out on the couch. I'm gonna do something that's equally good for me. And pretty often I realize I just want to go home and watch Netflix. It's not that I'm actually tired or like actually not in the right zone for it. I'm physically fine. I just want to go veg out. But when the option is like, that's just not an option. The option is like, I'm going to go home. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to do laundry. I'm going to do the dishes. I'm going to work on this work project that I haven't gotten to yet. Versus I'm just going to go home and chill out and eat a snack and watch TV. I tend to motivate very quickly to keep going.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a good argument for the morning workout where your brain hasn't seen as much of that stuff. Like, you haven't seen the email list that you have to get home to. You haven't, gotten so tired that then the couch is really even, accessible. And you're not going to necessarily sit on the couch. A lot of people wouldn't do that TV watching till the evening. So I think in the evening, it's easier to compare your options. Right. Whereas in the morning, if you have that, especially if you have the routine, but in the morning, you're not going to sit down and watch TV, right? Like, you're going to have to do chores or go to work or whatever. So maybe it's more attractive with that timing too. Mm-hmm. What was the thing? Oh, the other thing to think about is like, some days you do have to come home or you end up at home. Your brain overrides and you get there. I think I like you have to do chores or something, but you could also think about like, what else today will make me better tomorrow?
Well, that's where the meditation
or perfect. The yoga, maybe some core, but I mean, sometimes we need recovery. But I think a lot of times things like bike maintenance could be done. Mm-hmm. Make sure that tomorrow when you go and do something, or in 2 days when you go and try your intensity again after taking a rest day, you maybe have like a bike that's just like really ready to go, right? Or you've taken care of something that's moving you towards your goal. Mm-hmm. Registration, accommodation booking. What else are you nervous about with this upcoming race? Things, your pack, you're getting, food laid out and going through the math of the fueling strategy.
Looking at the course.
Sure. Download the tech guide. Reading the tech guide's a good one. So I think there's little steps you can take. And sometimes when we think about training, we're only thinking about the running or the pedaling on the bike. And we're forgetting about all the other stuff, right? We could make an argument for practicing cornering in a field if you're just, not feeling great pedaling. Like, you could certainly work on skills and maybe have a bit of fun like that if that's something that's accessible or relevant.
Mm-hmm. All right, perfect. And then the last thing we had talked about before this is the idea of that two-step authentication.
Right, yeah.
Which is like one of my favorite ways to look at this now.
Yeah, I just came up with this yesterday after being asked by a robot to confirm that I wasn't a robot for like the 10th time in the day.
Isn't that just what a robot would say, though? Yeah,
exactly. So everything now, this two-factor authentication. I can't even say my own catchphrase here I've come up with. So the idea being that, like, if the wattage is low, that's one. But that's not, like, the reason to quit. And often there's sources of error. There's miscalibration and things like this, right? And again, there's a range. So a lot of times what we're thinking we should be doing is a very fine PB, like ultimate best day ever, but there's a range usually that's like quite wide of what's reasonable. And again, we're putting half a hay bale into our barn of fitness. So with the two-factor, it might be like, I feel horrible, I wasn't motivated when I left, my heart rate is super depressed, I can't get it up, and the wattage is crummy. That's like multiple factor, like confirmation. I'm going to say confirmation instead now. So that would be a one way I would look at that, right? Where, the feeling isn't great and the heart rate isn't great. Whatever, pace isn't great. And so just multiple things are sort of adding, and we could, add HRV. My HRV in the morning maybe was like off, but that's not the reason for a bad day. There's lots of days I have that are great that HRVs may be lower, out of the range. I think you want to factor that in. And if it's, again, multiple days or multiple things, like, oh, that felt really hard to push that wattage or heart rate I usually ride at, then maybe that's a good sort of like two-factor where the HRV is actually like, okay, something's a little different here. So I think just thinking about it like that, like one thing is not the thing that breaks you.
I think that's kind of the most important part about that. It's not really any two things.
Right.
It's more just not freaking out about
and wrapping
one
it
thing.
around to like, oh, I'm a little draggy. Yesterday we had sort of a busy day and we had sort of got our schedule disrupted because we were at a clinic on Saturday and then had just some social stuff in the morning on a Sunday. And like, I'm very much like I ride at 9 or 10 a.m. And if I don't, it's just the day's ruined. But you know, it was fine. Like we got back and I was a little draggy and then like had to make myself go to the door. But once I got to the door, like my power and feeling on the bike was amazing. The ride went great. It was fine.
He was literally the most dramatic human being I've ever
Yeah,
seen.
like it was like the world was ending. But then it was just like, as long as I got at the door, then it was just like amazing power, great feeling, like zero effort to just like get it done. Great. Heart rate responsive, which for me is always tough. So message being, you know, one like draggy out the door. If you can beat that sensation, then that might be the only thing. And the 2-factor, you're a robot. Yeah.
All right. With that in mind, let's get into my conversation with Simon Marshall. Enjoy. So let's talk motivation. First thing I wanted to kind of get your take on. Lacking motivation to do a workout is normal, right? Like that's not a shocking thing.
Yeah, in fact, it's so normal. In fact, we all of our motivation sort of ebbs and flows in part because of biology, but also in part because of our environment, right? So we all know this as things suddenly get better when we're in a newer environment. So we have a tendency to what we call habituate to our environment. We are creatures of habit. We sit in the same place every day. You know, we do things in the same order. And when you get out of your routine, so that your kind of routine gets disrupted, something happens in us. And we know a little bit about what's happening in brain world, but suffice to say that it can really fuel you to do things that you perhaps found hard at home. So, and this goes not just for training, it goes for a whole host of things. People are struggling to not eat as much or to give up or to drink less. They're able to do those things a lot more when they're not in their own environment. Motivation and the environment are tightly connected.
And it's totally reasonable to occasionally not be motivated. We don't need to freak out and like switch our sport or anything. We just need to maybe shift our thinking.
That's so true. In fact, you know, sometimes we have athletes come to us and say, how do I help, you know, find some motivation, as though it's hidden under a stone somewhere. Yeah. They just, it's lost down the side of their sofa, right? And if only I could find it again. And unfortunately, motivation is always within us. It just hasn't been, think of it like an unlit fire starter or something like that, right? So we've always got it, but we just need to find the things that kind of are the match, the spark to it. And the nice thing about motivation, just like a little fire starter, is that motivation begets motivation. So it's like a snowball. So once you have a bit, it's easier to get a bit more. And if you have a lot, it's easier to keep that ball rolling. The hardest thing is to go from nothing to some. So this is you're trying to, light a fire without matches. So this is always the difficult challenge. So when we try and help people say, look, I know it feels like you're standing at the foot of Mount Everest at the moment and you can't possibly see how you're going to get up and over it. But trust me, after a week or 2 weeks of some basics of getting into a little habit and suiting up and trying things, there's a whole host of strategies we can use to help that. It becomes easier. So your head space now won't be the same head in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. So when you are at that more difficult port where there's a little bit longer riding or more intensity coming up. So we have to trust the motivation snowball that once it keeps rolling, it'll be a lot easier to keep rolling.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's kind of what a lot of the writers that I'm kind of working on this article around motivation have said. So what I thought would be kind of a fun thing to do, or I think it's a fun thing, I want to read you a couple of their tips for motivation, and I want to hear if you have a thought on like why it works. So sort of like what's the psych behind what they're saying. So the first one says that when he doesn't want to work out, he thinks about his teammates, and he thinks he wants to be better for the whole team as well as just for himself. So to me, his why is his teammates. So why does that work? Why?
So that's a good and astute observation, actually, to just be as an athlete to be aware that there are things that are more appealing to you, or things that are easier fire starters for your motivation than others, rather than just kind of banging your head against the wall just to keep doing the same things as you've always done. So one of the things that we know is that, and I'll use the analogy that we use in our book, if that's okay, with the chimp brain and the professor brain, the frontal cortex, the rational thinking you being the professor, and the limbic system, the emotional, paranoid, feeling, impulse, fight or flight center being the chimp. So your chimp brain has a lot of impulses, needs, and drives that it wants to feel safe, accepted, loved, and secure, and so on. So when we're no longer living in worlds where our lives are in danger, for the most of us anyway, that's true. But there are things, these higher order needs, like feeling accepted and feeling appreciated and feeling encouraged. Your chimp is really motivated most of the time to have those needs met. It always feels nice to have a few strokes, right? To get some praise and to get some likes. This is why social media is so popular. It's chimp brain pornography, right? Because it appeals to that need for our chimp to be recognized and accepted and approved and so on. So we use those sort of that fundamental fire starter for our motivation in our sport. So if you are struggling because you've been in the garage on a trainer for 3 months because of the weather and so on, this is why Zwift can really help. Any opportunity that you can get to make it about something other than just you is going to help. Your chimp will be like it when you're around like-minded people. This is why we have accountability buddies. This is why the power of doing things in a group. This is why all of those things really help. So anytime you can do something in a group where you don't feel judged, criticized, or evaluated, which is what your chimp will run away from rather than run to, rather than supported, you have a good time, you can have some fun, and it's sort of a right healthy level of competitiveness for you, then your chimp brain is going to be attracted to that. So give your chimp what it needs, right? Particularly if you're stuck down in a basement on a trainer.
I like that visual. I'm just like picturing feeding a monkey.
I know, right? Yeah, exactly right. So that's probably why for him or her, why that feels a little bit more motivating.
That's great. I love that. The next one, I love this guy because he was just so honest, and I kind of like it's a great one. He's like, I honestly don't know how I go hard. I just know that in this sport you need to suffer and you get used to it.
yeah, I love that too. That should be tattooed in, whatever. So that's a really good observation. So what we know is that when, exercise at higher intensity hurts, and anyone that tells you that they love the pain is either lying or they're on some weird medication, because fundamentally the human brain and our physiologic system does not like noxious stimulation. It doesn't like to feel uncomfortable. And that's also true of high, like threshold type intensity. So hard intensity is really difficult to do. So what is it about that how do I get better at doing that if I don't like it? Well, we now know, for example, that athletes, have a higher exercise pain tolerance than non-athletes. We know that people who practice putting themselves in situations that are discomforting are better at coping with discomfort than people who don't practice it. So one of the common threads here or the common themes in the research is that you have to earn the ability to cope with pain, you can't learn it, you have to earn it, right? So the bottom line here is, yes, that you can read as many books as you like about how to embrace the suck, and our book included in that, right? But at the end of the day, if you want to truly, our books like ours and other people about how you can help you kind of intellectualize the strategies you can use when you're in the moment. But all that's doing is telling you what tools you need. It doesn't tell you actually make you better at using those tools and coping. So you have to expose yourself to discomfort. And one of the reasons for that is because of a scientific concept called neuroplasticity. You might have heard of that phrase, neuroplasticity. And all that means is that our brain has like plastic qualities to it. It's ever changing, and it can move and change based on the environments that it's in. And our brain, we know from how the synapses are connected to neural pathways, they change in response to the situations that we find ourselves in. And one of those, and we may even know parts of the brain that this is located, for example, an area called the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps regulate perception of effort, perceived exertion. It tells us how an exercise feels, how hard something feels. So we know that there is some filtering going on. So when we actually force ourselves to experience discomfort, our brain is physically adapting to that so that it becomes easier next time. We're training our brain, literally, not just figuratively, literally we are training our brain to adapt to cope with discomfort. That only so much intellectualizing can do, but actually being in that moment can help it. So parts of our brain get denser, they get thicker, certain structures that help regulate and control this pain, discomfort. So we say that we want to try and almost force ourselves to be in the hurt locker, not too much, but we need to do it fairly regularly so that we don't forget detrain, and we know that as I forgot how to hurt, right? And any racing cyclist knows that the first race of the season always feels one of the worst because you've forgotten how to hurt yourself. So we can detrain as well. So neuroplasticity works both ways. The brain strengthens, but it also weakens if we don't force it to practice. So putting yourself in those situations, mental toughness sessions, higher intensity sessions, is probably the quickest way to get better at doing it. So do it more often.
Yeah, that... I don't like that, but it's
I know.
accurate.
I wish there was just sing this song to yourself backwards and finger tap, and you'll suddenly be superhuman.
Yeah. Well, and on that note, though, the next one, like 3 of the women on the team said playlist, putting on the go-to playlist. Why does that get us like? And I know for me, I'm doing my runs, the warm-up podcast is on, but like when it's the intervals, I got to put the music on.
Yep. So music is a huge ergogenic aid, and the research is so consistent with this. When we do tests to exhaustion on treadmills and on bike ergometers, we know that when people listen to music that they like, not just forced to listen to music you hate. When you listen to music you like, there's certain characteristics of music that improve exercise performance. Your perceived exertion drops, your time to exhaustion goes up, so you just become a bit more physically resilient in the presence of music. So the question is, why? Because most of us can relate to that. It feels nice to go to the gym or to work out to music. So why is it? What is so special about music? Well, one thing, and there's some competing theories about this, but in general, what we think, there's a couple things probably going on. One is that the parts of our brain that are working when there's music playing are not the same parts of our brain when we're thinking, when will this be over? How long have I got to endure this for? This sucks. I'm bored. Did I feed the cat? Have I locked the car door? Or all the other sort of distractions that we have. So, and one of the reasons for that is that there are parts of our brain that in our book, we call it the computer brain, but other sort of authors have different names for this. But in essence, we're trying to tap into that part of our brain that runs on autopilot, right? The rest of our head can kind of switch off, and we default to running like an auto routine. Just as you would do, you don't have to think about when you walk or you have a conversation when you're driving. You haven't got to think about, okay, how do I drive and still talk? You kind of can do it automatically. So there's some tasks that we can sort of default to our computer brain to run automatically. And biking is one of those. If we're experienced, we don't have to constantly think about how to steer or how to corner. We just kind of do it because we're so used to doing it. So what we're trying to do is whenever the chimp brain and the professor brain start getting agitated, they're thinking too much, they're feeling discomfort, they're occupying bandwidth in your head to try and convince you, Molly, why don't you do something that's actually more enjoyable? You don't have to do this tonight. Do it tomorrow. You can do your hard session later or whatever it happens to be. So we need to sort of have a strategy of quietening down that noise. And one of the the notions in the brain is that we have something called a limited channel capacity. And all that means is that we don't really in brain world have picture in picture, right? Only one part of our brain can really be in charge at any one time. And even when we're multitasking, it's not actually multiple parts of our brain or multiple things working at the same time. It's just that we're very good at switching tasks at such speed, it looks as though that we're doing things at the same time. Does that make sense? So when you have music on, that's really what it's doing. It's actually forcing parts of our brain, our computer brain, to kind of pay into simple things that that part of our brain loves, repetition, something that has sort of a metronomic, rhythmic quality to it, right? This is why music is good. This is why counting works the same way. This is why mantras, it's the same phrase over and over again, all explained in the same ways, that it kind of is nudging, giving a sharp nudge in the ribs for a part of our brain to take over our thought processes, our mindset, and that down regulates or crowds out the chimp telling you don't do it, it's hurt, stop it, or it's crowding out the professor brain saying you don't have to do this now, or this is stupid, why do you do that, or this is sucks, how long will this go on for? So that seems to be really helpful. So music, what we would say, or I would recommend certainly, is find music that has a good complement to the emotional or mental state that you need to be in. So as the intensity of the exercise goes up, the strength of the music has to also go up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in other words, if you try and listen to, I don't know,
Adele.
to make fun of Adele, yeah, exactly. I was going to say Kenny G. Okay, Adele is perfect. Adele is perfect. So I'm listening to one of, a sultry Adele song in the warm up, and I can really enjoy it. But Adele isn't going to help me when I'm at FTP plus 20%, right?
Yeah.
Because I find, and our attentional field, when the discomfort gets greater, our attentional field narrows. So in other words, it's harder to focus on other things to be distracted. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in other words, I don't know what another kind of funny a metaphor here is, but the person trying to distract you with niceties on the sideline, as things become more and more painful, it's harder to pay attention to the distraction. So the distraction has to, the signal of the distraction has to increase, right? The person waving has to be bigger, or flying a stronger flag, or shouting at you louder. And the same is true of music. So when you ask people, when you're really, really suffering, what kind of music do you listen to? A lot of them, you'll be surprised. They say the music is kind of a bit angry, right? Or it might have some more sort of, a little bit more risque lyrics, or they're kind of stuff that I wouldn't usually listen to if I'm on the car, but I love, like Leslie is a good example. She listens to German techno music, right? I mean, yes. I would rather stab my own eyes out than listen to that, right? But I'm rarely in the effort state that she's in that gets her through those sessions. So think of your playlists as curating them according to the sorts of sessions that you have to do. So make the signal, music signal, the tempo of it, the lyrics, the sort of general level of get up ready for itness louder as the intensity goes up.
Perfect. I love it. And then, so this one is actually from my thoughts, and I know you talked about it in the book. It's almost kind of negative motivation. For me, it's like, okay, well, you don't want to do this run? Great. You're not going to go watch Netflix. You're going to go clean the bathrooms, or you're going to write this article, that you're going to transcribe this interview is probably like the scariest one for me. And like suddenly I'm really motivated to get out the door.
Right. Yeah, you've stumbled upon a concept in psychology called contingency management. Again, I apologize on behalf of all psychologists for that rather terrible phrase, contingency management. So all that means is the contingencies, the consequences, or they can be rewards, or they can be punishment, or the consequence of doing something. We're managing them to help us cope with the things that we like doing or don't like doing, right? So So, and we know, for example, that our brain will sort of cut deals with itself. The chimp brain will cut deals with the professor. And that's really what's happening with that. The chimp brain wants to do things that are pleasurable, that are enjoyable, that make it feel accepted, loved, secure, blah, 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 blah. The professor brain wants you to do the right thing, right? That's right for the time, that makes sense, that follows the investment that you've put into it, all facts and logic. So when we start cutting deals with ourselves about, oh, if you do that, I'll give you this, it really reflects the argument that's going on between your chimp and your professor, a bit like a parent and a child in a way, right? So your chimp is saying, I don't want to do this. But then your professor brain is saying, but if you just do this one thing, I'll give you this. And the chimp, because it's a bit dumb, is like, oh, okay, oh, all right, then are you sure? How do I know that you will do that? So there's sort of, we set up these little games that we play in our own head that we can sort of tease our chimp. We're managing our chimp to do things or go along with things that it perhaps doesn't want to in exchange for some reward down the line. And your chimp will always love rewards. So that's a really good strategy that many people use. The difficulty, of course, is when it comes to enforcement, right? Because you've got to remember that your chimp is the stronger of the two in your head. It's 5 times quicker than 5 times stronger. So when it comes to the reward, the professor brain is saying, okay, you've earned that cappuccino after that hard ride or whatever it happens to be, and your chimp brain, slurps that up gratefully or whatever. But then the chimp brain will want more of that thing, or let's have another one. And then the professor brain saying, no, this was just one, it's just this one time. And then when you feed your chimp brain with what it wants, the arousal level of it kind of increases, right? And we know this. There are studies to show that when your chimp is aroused by food, and when I say aroused, I'm using this in the psychological sense. Meaning that it's more...
not the rated explicit podcast sense.
Not when you're exactly, as a chimp has a lady boner. But when your chimp is sort of in a heightened state, that's better, a heightened state of sensitivity to that thing, it becomes even more bullish and it wants something even more. So if we give in to that, your chimp then, and you have a second glass or another treat or another thing of that thing that was only promised one. Rather than you thinking, oh, I'm really helping my chimp out, what you're actually doing is you're sort of separating, or you're breaking that management of that contingency, right? Think of it like an if-then statement. If you do this, I'll give you this. And your chimp, just like training a dog or a little kid, in many ways, that's probably a poor analogy for parents out there, but we're messing with the strength of that association. We're changing the rules, right? And so your chimp really doesn't do well with that, because now it knows that it can get more. So that thing is no longer the power of one unit of that thing is no longer as motivating, because I used to get 2 of them, and so on. So we need to be quite strict with how we do those. And sometimes we have to be so strict that we have to outsource them. So in other words, we have to make a third party responsible for the reward so that we don't get caught up in this trap. So there are some ways that you can do that. And there are a ton of apps now that, these social accountability apps that you put in, $100 and then you get the $100 back if you complete all the challenges or something like that. So these methods that we use to outsource the rewarding are simply there to try and up the ante, up the stakes, so it doesn't just become a little internal battle between your own chimp and your professor.
Awesome. The other one of the women on the team came up with is reminding herself that not every workout is going to be a personal best. So if you're feeling super unmotivated, you're feeling just kind of meh that day, it doesn't really matter. It's not like that workout has to be your absolute best thing.
Yeah, that's so great to see and to take that pressure off. And it takes the pressure off you, right? You give yourself permission to not have to be fast or be efficient every single time. Some sessions really suck. It doesn't mean that you don't try, effort and attitude every session, but some sessions aren't going to go as well as others. And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to that, right? That's the frustrating thing often about being an athlete. So what we say is, think of your athleticism or your athletic training, life, career, whatever history, as like a sculpture. So you're trying to say you're trying to carve something out of wood. You've got a big block of wood in front of you. And every training session or race is just one little chip with a little chisel off that block to make it into something that you hopefully want it to look like at the end. So in that sense, every opportunity, every racing and training episode is an opportunity to, like, should I take a bit more off? Should I take a bit less off? Let's stand back. How's it looking? What will I do different next time to make that look more like a nose to whatever. So we try and, the reason we do this is to say, takes the pressure off individual sessions. An individual session doesn't mean anything in the big scheme of things. There are some sessions that are more important than others, clearly, like races or breakthrough or key workouts. But for the most part, they're all just another opportunity to get some feedback about what you need to do differently next time. Mm-hmm. More base fitness, more speed, more, I'm not going to do this after work, I'm going to do it before work, because it's like trying to get on the trainer at 6:30 p.m. is looking horrible, whatever it is. So all of these things. So we're trying to treat this as opportunities to figure out what works better and what doesn't. And then once we do that and we take the pressure off, we then can start to say, well, maybe the goal of this session is not about sticking to this zone or to do 12 minutes above FTP for that long, whatever it happens to be. It's just simply about, if you get on, and most of us know halfway through the session that today is not my day, right? Because everything hates and hurts, and all you want to do is just get the fuck off the bike.
Yep.
Right? Or you've been on the trainer and you can't, the thought of being another hour on the trainer and your biscuits are already so fucking red raw that you can't handle it anymore, right? So you're thinking, this is just miserable. So it becomes then, we shift the goals to becoming a mental toughness session. The goal is persistence. So everything you turn the watch around, you put, electrical tape over it, a post-it over the garment so you can't see how much you're actually sucking. It just becomes about surviving or getting through it. And then what you need to do is, once you've made that distinction, doesn't matter about pace, it just means about getting through it, you then start to segment that effort into tiny, tiny chunks. And we've spoken about this before, I know, is that the other thing that your brain loves, not just music and rhythm, but it loves breaking things up into smaller segments.
Yes.
If you think, and anytime, if you have to do 3 hours on a stationary trainer, oh my God, I'd rather drink a quart of bleach,
yes.
right? But what I can do is I can do 20 minutes, and then after 20 minutes, I'll see how I feel. And if I want to do another 20 minutes, I will. And lo and behold, because of how our dopaminergic reward system works, we get through one little milestone, and our biological motivation to continue is increased because we now have more dopamine. So I'll do another 20 minutes. I'm now halfway through, I might as well. And so that's the snowball of motivation to continue. So we leverage that to our advantage by saying it's mental toughness, nothing else matters, just get through it. Okay, let's just get through the next 10 minutes and then I'll make a decision. Let's just get through another 5 minutes and then I'll make another decision. And you use that little backwards and forwards as a way to get you through those sessions in a far more economical way.
Awesome. And then kind of almost on the flip side of this, at what point do you just need the day off? Like, do you have a kind of way that you would measure this where it's like, oh my God, I've just been so unmotivated. I've been pushing myself through these workouts for, 7 days now and it's not getting any better and I still just do not feel like doing this?
Yeah.
When do we stop trying to trick ourselves and just be like,
I know, right? I know. Psychologists even have a fancy name for that. They've got fancy names for everything.
I love the fancy names.
So psychologists call that goal disengagement. I laugh just even saying the words because it's so fucking ridiculous. So goal disengagement is when do I know when to disengage from my goal, to step away, right? So what we generally say is, and this is the answer to that question that you asked, is really quite nuanced because it depends on what we don't want to put people at risk of injury, of overtraining and all that sort of force. It becomes supposed to be fun and now it's a chore. I'm not really enjoying it. So we try and unpack the reasons why you don't want to with a little bit more sophistication. So we try and, almost like do an audit of the quitting or the not wanting to start. So we often talk about the two types of quitting, and quitting can be quitting during, like, I don't want to do this anymore, you climb off, or it can be, I'm not even going to start doing that, I don't want to do that, so I'm just not going to do it. So you've quit before you start. So we talk about the legit quit and the shit quit. I don't know if you remember those two phrases that we use. So a legit quit is a quit that is for a legitimate reason. And anybody who cares about your health or you as a person will say, yes, I agree, you shouldn't do this anymore, because, about a single session or you're involved in a sport. So we're talking legit quits are when there's a real risk of harm or trauma or illness to you if you keep going. No one would recommend that, someone who's having an asthma attack, just keep pushing through it. Mm-hmm. No one would recommend that you run on a stress fracture. No, blah, blah, blah. So on and on we could go with those. But that also applies to some emotional legitimate reasons as well, and not just in sport, but staying in an unhappy and miserable relationship, right? Mm-hmm. That's a legitimate reason to quit. If things aren't going to change, why should you just stick it out when things are miserable? Same for in a job that you hate. So in sport, if you've fallen out of love with the sport and it doesn't do the same thing for you anymore, you don't really enjoy it as much, or you've forgotten why you're doing it, that might also be a good reason to have a bit of a legit quit. And in actual fact, even with those, what we do in sport, we say, if you're not sure about your relationship or whether I want to do this as much, I'm not talking about just it's Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, do I do this tonight or can I put it off till tomorrow? I'm talking about a bit more of a fundamental, oh God, another season or another month of this, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. Mm-hmm. A good idea is you can sort of pressure test that motivation by forcing yourself to have a time out from it, like a 4-week block off or a 2-week block off or a period where you don't do it. And importantly, that has to be a non-routine hiatus from it. So you don't do this like, it's off season, or it's a taper week, so I'm going to see how I feel, because they would always be part of your natural up and down of training anyway. So mm-hmm. This is an out of the usual stepping away moment. And what you do is you then try and examine how that fits with you, right? So you're trying on for size, you not having the sport for a while. So if you find yourself getting a bit antsy or agitated, or you really, things that you kind of took for granted, you miss now about it, it might be a sign that you still want to do it. Or if you say, you know what, I've filled my time now with so many other things, and I keep my body in good shape because I now do this instead of that. And if I'm honest, I don't actually miss it. It's kind of a relief to not have my weekends back, all that kind of stuff. So, mm-hmm. So if you come into those conclusions, we know that they're really good, obviously legit quits. But what gets most of us in trouble, and this is probably the 90% of the quits, are these shit quits. And the shit quits are simply when... So shit quits, unlike legit quits, are when you've quit because you just don't really want to hurt, right? Mm-hmm. You can't be bothered, or I just don't want to be, I don't want to get cold, right? Or whatever it happens to be. So in other words, there's no long-term risk to your health, your emotional well-being, your relationship, your, blah, blah, blah. It's just a kind of an in-the-moment desire to avoid something that's fairly discomforting. So there's a whole host of things that you can do for that as well. One really great strategy is a bit like the get out of jail free card, is that you think of it like you give yourself each week, and some athletes that I work with, I put, depending on where they train, they put 3 plastic rubber ducks on the top of their refrigerator. I know this sounds bizarre, just bear with me. So,
all right.
Right, 3 miniature plastic ducks. I don't know why plastic duck. I think one of the first athletes I did with this chose a plastic duck. But anyway, so I keep using that. So you have 3 of them, and you're allowed, these are your get out of jail free cards. You can use these like trump cards anytime during the week to get out of any session. I'm just taking the context of training now and racing. Any session without any having to feel guilty, without having to defend it, it's like a little ready-made sick note, right? Now sometimes, depending on how bad the shit quit problem is with you, I might give you 3 a week, I might give you 3 a month, I might give you 1. But the bottom line is, when you've used up that 1 or 2 or 3, there are no more. You have to now complete everything that's on your schedule to the best of your ability, notwithstanding that conversation about shit quit, so a legit quit. So what this really does psychologically, it gives you a bit of a mental comfort blanket to say, okay, I've got an opportunity if I want to sort of just not do that today, it's fine. I'm not just a total, letting myself, I've got a training peaks account, it's red, and I have to stare at a red session not completed, and that drives me crazy, or so on. But what it does is it gives you permission. That's a huge thing. Your chimp is a little bit happier, and your professor brain is certainly happier. But then it also forces you to be a bit more selective about, is this really one of those sessions I want to use this on? Now, surely, I know it's a 90-minute session on the trainer, but I have got some Netflix, and I have got a 3-hour ride on Friday outside, and I might need it then. So I don't want to use this one fucking rubber duck I've got left on this when I might need it. And so you're cutting deals again, chimp cutting deals to your professor cutting deals to your chimp. So you can use this as a good way to sort of cut deals with yourself, to give yourself permission to do stuff that you don't want to. But in terms of most of the other times, we have what we call a quit audit in our book. In fact, it's a little exercise that we have people do, and we ask them to write down all of the instances where they really kind of threw in the mental towel, right? So it might be that, if I'm honest, I got home from work, it was a bit later than usual, it was pretty stressful, and all I wanted was a glass of wine. I didn't want to get on the trainer, and I just blew the trainer off. Fuck it. I just can't be bothered with it. I want to chat to hubby, I wanted to see so on, I just didn't want to do it. Okay, fine. So what we do is we take all of those instances where you think that it's a genuine shit quit. We all shit quit all the time. There's not something that's wrong with you if you do this more. Yeah. It's just that this is part of the brain tendency. So, and then we start to sort of untangle them. Like, what are the reasons, for example, we say, what are the reasons that you gave to the world about why you didn't do it? And then what are the darker reasons that are private that you never mentioned? So it might be that you said, giving the example, you come home from work, I wanted to have a glass of wine, talk to hubby, and blah, blah. What I actually said when hubby said to me, hey, I thought you were supposed to be, are you going on a trainer? No, I mean, I just actually my knee's been a bit painful. I've got to send some emails before, but, whatever. And full well that, yes, of course, there'll always be those things that could be true, but they're not the real reason. I just can't be fucking bothered, if I'm honest, right? So, and then you start to write about those deeper, darker things as well, and try and be as articulate as you can about them. Describe what's, the nature of the can't be botheredness, and then you rate all of those decisions on a scale of 1 to 10, the 10 being definitely shit quit, 1 being definitely not shit quit, and you look for patterns in your tendency to sort of climb off, if there's to use that analogy. So, and then what that helps you do is to see what situations you're a bit more vulnerable to shit quitting in, right? And it might be long day, stressful long day at work, and I have to do training in the afternoon or evening. That might be the through line of the instances where you don't want to. And there's a whole host of science about what's happening in brain world to make you not want to do that. That can be a whole other conversation. But suffice to say, that if we can know what our tendencies are, because we're forced to be aware of them using this exercise, we can plan for them in a lot more effective ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. I think my thing is, like, if you're questioning if you should take a day off, if you're trying to find a reason to take a day off, you probably don't need to take a day off. And if you're trying to rationalize not taking a day off, you probably need the day off.
Right, exactly. Well, so there's another concept that you may have heard of called cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of that? So yes. Cognitive dissonance is just a psychologist's phrase for we, in all of our heads, sit 2 opposing sides to every issue, right? We all are conflicted about most things in life. Very, very rarely are we only ever have a pro column and there's no con column. Mm-hmm. And this even goes for behaviors that we know are pretty damaging to our health, right? Even, you ask a smoker to do this, there'll be lots of advantages of keep going doing the shitty things that are hurting you. So in all of us, we have, now your brain doesn't like to have conflict, right? Doesn't like to have dissonant competing thoughts. That's where the cognitive dissonance comes from. So it'll always try and resolve the dissonance to make it more harmonious in brain world, right? So there's not in a conflict. And the way that your brain does this is quite remarkable. One of the strategies, it will go, it will over-rationalize or intellectualize so that the pro column outweighs the con column, right? So it will make that list really long, but not really make the con list very long, right? So, and so on. Or it will use some denial or avoidance or any other strategy, or maybe some self-sabotage.
Starting to understand all of my high school relationships all of a sudden.
I know, right? Well, this works for so many things in life. And again, all completely normal and very, very common strategies. And this boils, and cognitive dissonance isn't just about our sport or about high school relationships. It's also about things that we hold dear, like opinions. Like if you look at the landscape of political discourse, and the problems that we have at the moment, particularly in the US, is grounded in cognitive dissonance. So you'd think that when someone is presented with an opposing a fact that opposes their belief system, right? Climate change is not real. Yes, it is. Look, 99.9% of scientists agree. You'd think that, someone would change their mind when faced with opposing information but they don't. They actually do the opposite. They become more entrenched in their thinking, right? It's totally counterintuitive. But the reason is because of cognitive dissonance. I have so much invested in thinking and believing this way that if you're now going to suddenly come around and tell me that there is no Santa Claus, right, or whatever that thing is for you, rather than say, I better get used to life with no Santa Claus now, what we actually do is we double down on our belief system to force ourselves to make it our belief system true, right? So we go on the attack. We attack the source. We call it fake news. We might just do whataboutism, well, you've done this too. See, it's not just me. So our heads are constantly trying to reconcile to keep the internal conflict down to a minimum. So we do this with our sport as well when it comes to things that we don't really want to have to deal with in training. Because we don't like to feel as though, oh my God, I have this big session, but I'm paying for a coach. And what the fuck are you paying for a coach then if you're not even going to do the work? I mean, come on, you're spending all this money. And you've got inner conflict immediately. So we start to we gravitate to weird and wonderful, mental acrobatics to justify in our head why the course of action that we actually want to do, our chimp wants us to do, is the right one. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Also, I'm now thinking about the Santa Claus one and me just trying to convince myself that my parents just help Santa. It's not the presents in the closet are just helping him out. He doesn't have that much stuff. Right,
exactly.
I think I did that for 2 or 3 years before my brain finally admitted that there was no Santa. We're going to have to include a thing in the intro that's just if you're in the car with your kids listening to this, hands over their ears.
I know. Oh, that's a good point.
Forget the cursing. Santa. It's really the Santa issue.
That's right. It's right. I know. But I think, for thoughts and beliefs that we cling to with such a fervor, we have to sort of analyze them. And in fact, when you look at all of the treatments for cognitive dissonance, I say treatments in an air quote way, say, how do we de-bias our thinking? The hallmark of all of the strategies is something called metacognitive skill. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, metacognition. And all that means is meta is some bigger picture. So meta thinking or metacognitive is thinking about how we think, right? So when you're training someone to have good metacognitive skills, you're you're sort of coaching them, teaching them to understand how they think. Just, for example, learning about Chimp and Professor is a metacognitive exercise in itself, right? Because I'm forcing myself to reflect on how my thinking works. I'm thinking about my thinking. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So these debiasing techniques that we use to manage cognitive dissonance and a whole host of other cognitive biases that we fall foul of, they start with saying, let's look at the train of thinking that led us to be in this situation. Where does it break down in logic, where we start to say, no, I'm still going to cling to this belief, even though I know that it's not true. And you can use this analogy about movies have been made about this, take religion. If you somehow had the answer to is there a God or not, right? You have somehow magically found this answer. What would you do with that information? So if I start to then say, there was a book, a film with Ricky Gervais about when he realized that, in the afterlife, I don't know if you ever saw it, it's really funny. But what it boils down to is to say, sometimes living in some level of ignorance or obscurity from the actual fact is not bad, right?
Yeah.
Because it helps us go on in life. It gives us, religion gives people, I hate to pick on religion here, but religious thinking gives people a lot of purpose and meaning and direction and moral and ethical thinking in life. Why do you want to pull that out from under somebody? It's just that is unethical, right? So we have to use our ability to use cognitive dissonant reduced strategies in a fairly responsible way as well, right? This is why, I'm telling you, 4-year-old child, that there's no Santa Claus, because if you're going to hear it eventually and you need to know the truth, and who benefits from that? Nobody, right? So the responsibility of that comes fairly. So we can take this down onto a fairly simple level, like when it comes to climbing on a trainer at 7 p.m. on a Thursday night, right? Listen, I'm using all of the tricks to convince myself why it's okay to not ride, right? And I don't care that I'm lying to myself fundamentally, because you know what? I know that fundamentally I'll get back to the session, and it's the sculpturing analogy. One session doesn't define me or make me into a great or bad person, athlete, whatever. So I move on. So ignorance can be bliss sometimes.
Amazing. Oh man, I know we could probably just keep talking for 8 hours, but we've already gone for an hour about motivation. So I think that's an awesome place to start. So tell everyone where they can find you and remind everyone where they can take your class now.
Yeah, so you can find me and Leslie, my wife, Leslie Patterson, at www.braveheartcoach.com. braveheartcoach.com, and we even have a little smog test, we call it. So you can email us a few little questions, and you can email us with those questions, and we call you up, and we have a 15-minute no string. We're not trying to sell you coaching or training with us, just a talk through some of the stuff you're dealing with and how to help. So we invite people who are interested in either the physical training components or the mental training components to do that. Or you can read our book called The Brave Athlete. And that's available from, places they sell books. So now, Amazon for most people now, right? And there's an audio book as well that we narrate, Leslie and I narrate, that you can listen to that talks about all these concepts in much more detail.
Amazing. I love it. Simon, thank you so much for this. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and it's really fun, I think, getting to do that, where I got to go through what athletes have said and kind of hear your take on it and break it down. So awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure, Molly. Always lovely to talk to you.
You too. All right. Take care. Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete podcast. You can check out my stuff over at theoutdooredit.com or by following me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford. And you can check out Peter's coaching, training plans, blogs, all that fun stuff over at smartathlete.ca or by following him on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Glassford. And if you want to support this show and other awesome podcasts, please check out wideanglepodium.com for show info, other podcasts, bonus content, and to become a donating member so you can get all of that rad behind the scenes content. and help keep shows like this on the air. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the information that we're bringing to you every single week, do us a solid and pop into iTunes to leave us a rating and review. It takes you about 2 seconds. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your phone, and it really helps us out. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.